Inside North Korea, an American Navy intelligence ship captured 50 years ago. Still on display here. A window into the past that still haunts retired Marine Sergeant Bob Chicca.
All of a sudden something hits and holy cow.
On January 23rd, 1968, Chicca was taken prisoner while on the USS Pueblo, 14 miles from North Korean land. He remembers the ship surrounded and taking fire.
It happens so fast you don't know what's going on. It blew me off my feet.
One crew member was killed in the attack, 82 others taken as prisoners.
U.S. negotiators met for the third time today with North Korean communists at Panmunjom.
11 months of torture followed.
They kicked me a lot, and it caused a lot of problems.
The American crew fought back in their own ways, some extending their middle fingers in photos like this one. Freedom came in December 1968. The men walked one by one across the Bridge of No Return into South Korea.
When you're just a little bit from the other side, you get this one's for real. This one's for real, and you're getting out.
The capture of the USS Pueblo brought America and North Korea close to another full-scale conflict. If history repeats itself, perhaps there are some lessons here for today.
At this time, please help me welcome Mr. Bob Chicca.
Boy, that was a hell of an introduction. They're always embarrassing, but that one took the cake. It's hard to believe it's been that long ago. There were 83 men on the ship, which gives 83 years worth of experiences. So what I talk about is only going to be my own. And I'm heavily involved with the crew. However, at that time, I was simply temporarily assigned to the ship for a 30-day TAD mission. From my standpoint, I'd been in Japan for several years, working with Russian stuff. When I first got to join the Marine Corps, of course, apparently I did well on the tests, and they had me earmarked for intelligence work, but it didn't come to fruition for about 6 or 8 months. And at some point after the first school I went to, we had an opportunity to apply for language school and extend our enlistment. So I thought, what the hell, I'd go for it. And in the Marine Corps, you don't pick what you want to do. They go through their books and decide what language, so they assigned me to Korean. And so I spent the next year or so up in Monterey, California at the Defense Language School. There have been so many changes in the last 50 years that some of this stuff is going to sound really weird. I mean, this is back in the old days. There's no cell phones. GPS hadn't even been invented. Loran was just beginning in experimental stages. And so the Russians at that time had a whole fleet of trawler ships that they used to actually gather intelligence and cruise our coastlines. And so back around that time, someone in the military decided that if they find this so neat, maybe we should give it a try. So the Pueblo, the Palm Beach, and the Banner were the experiment. And rather than sinking huge funds into this, they refit 3 old World War II riverboat transport ships, the Pueblo, the Palm Beach, and the Banner, as intelligence collection ships, and then sent us out to do the work. A ship like the Pueblo, when it was an AKL back in the river transport times, it would have a crew of maybe 35, 40 men on board. And so we had 83 men on board. So what they did is convert the holds on the ship where they carried supplies into berthing areas for the rest of us. And about half the crew was ship's company that ran the ship, and the other half were the intelligence collection. That last picture he showed of the guy with all the receivers around there, they had been pushed back. The sod hut that we worked in is maybe a quarter of the size of this room, and all those all that equipment was moved into about a 3-foot space in between. And so we worked in that 3-foot space in the middle. And then they had access to the back to rewire and repair things and things like that. For me, I was in Japan at the time, and all the other Marines had been sent to Vietnam for a TAD trip for 6 months. And they all went except me. And I wanted to go and get it over with and get back to Japan. So I did a lot of inquiry, and they finally came down and told me that this ship was coming up, and they were going to assign me to it. I look at this picture. I don't know if you noticed some of the pictures of the ship on the screen here. One of them was actually going backwards in the picture. And they always took pictures of the ship on calm seas. It was never like that. It was like this out there on the ocean. And I mean, that ship, we took some tremendous rolls. In converting the ship, the actual sod hut was too high in the center, and it threw our moment off, and we took some pretty heavy rolls. There were times in the storms I'd actually walking on the bulkhead as trying to get from one place to another on the ship. Most of Americans, when they think of Navy ships, they think of the destroyers and the aircraft carriers and things like that are up in many different cities. We have the Midway in San Diego. You can put 36 Pueblos on the deck of the Midway. So it gives you a rough idea of what the ship was like. We had a flank speed of 12.5 knots. Our normal cruising speed was 6 knots. And when you leave here and walk to your car, you're doing about 6 knots. So it gives you a rough idea of what the ship was like. But it was an adventure, and most of the people on the ship, except for me, were volunteers. Prior to the ship, they decided to send me to South Korea for a while. I bring this up only because once I learned the language, they sent me to an artillery battery. And of course, the artillery battery had no idea what to do with a Korean linguist. And when the division was getting ready to go to Vietnam, they found that they had 8 of us in intelligence lost at Camp Pendleton. So they finally gathered us all together and started working on getting us back with the intelligence group. But during that entire time, of course, there was no using the Korean language or anything like that. Once we got back into the intelligence group, and Bob Hammond, the other Marine on the ship, and our careers paralleled each other. We were both sent to Japan to work in Russian again. So a couple months before the Pueblo went out, they sent me over to South Korea to see what the Army was doing. So I spent a couple months over there with Army intelligence and learned that there was no way in hell that I could do what they expected me to do on the ship. I just didn't have the linguistic ability at that time after so much time had passed. But that doesn't much matter. They said I'm going anyway. So I joined the ship on January 3rd, 1968. And we were captured on the 23rd. It was quite a 30-day TAD trip here. They didn't want it known that Marines were on the ship because usually Marines on the ship indicated something special. So they wanted us to wear Navy uniforms, which really didn't go over well with us. So we did end up in a compromise. We wore Navy dungarees, a Marine Corps shirt, and if we went topside, we put a Navy peacoat over it. So that's the way we went to sea and experienced all the different things. When the Navy puts together a ship, they go back and look at their books, and they've got a book that'll tell you what should be on that ship. And however, with the Pueblo and the Palm Beach and the Banner being an experimental thing, no one really knew what we should have on board the ship. So intelligence places all over the world would send Commander Bucher and the other skippers stuff that they thought he could use. And we literally had too much stuff on the ship. So the first thing we did when we left Yokohama was go down to Sasebo, Japan, and offload a couple tons of material. But we still had too much on the ship, but you get to fight the war with the equipment you've got, not what you'd like to have, which became more evident when we got further into it. So the Russians weren't sure what we were, so they had a few ships out there trying to track us. And again, this is back in the dark ages. We were traveling in radio silence. Back in the dark ages, no one could tell where you were unless you emitted some kind of a signal. So we were in radio silence until we had been officially detected. And that didn't occur until the day before our capture. So we as soon as we left Sasebo, we ran into some more storms, so I could practice walking on the bulkheads again. And we lost the Russians going through the Tsushima Straits, and then sailed up the center of the Sea of Japan till we got off of Vladivostok, Russia, and then turned in toward the coastline and started sailing down the coast of North Korea. We generally operated from about 16 to 25 miles out to sea. Although our country only recognizes a 3-mile limit, the North Koreans claimed 12, so we were under orders not to intrude into their waters, so we didn't. We generally operated outside that. On one of the maps that they had up there, they showed some of the fixes where the ship was supposed to be. And the ones that had us inside their territorial waters were the Loran fixes. It was an experimental thing, and it just wasn't all that accurate at that time. But if you look at it, in order for the ship to be in the different places it said we had to approach speeds of over 100 knots to get from one spot to the other. But that didn't bother the North Koreans. They just had their story and they were sticking to it. The point of contention a lot with the Pueblo incident was whether or not we really did intrude into North Korean waters. And we didn't, just from a practical standpoint. If you're going to intrude into the waters of a hostile country, you want to go in a ship with enough speed to get the hell out of there if you're caught, or with enough armament to shoot your way out if you had to. And in no way was the Pueblo like that. A biggest point of contention from our standpoint was that no help came once the incident started. There were supposed to be contingency plans out there. You see these different pictures of the Navy convoys and things going out to the Far East at the current time, and there'll be 10 or 12 ships in the convoy going out. We operated alone. That's why the theme song of The Lonely Bull is what Commander Bucher selected for the ship. So we were out there all by ourselves. And harassment of American ships goes on all the time. It probably less now than back then. But if a Navy ship was out there, you could count on some of the enemy ships coming out and just harassing you. And it wasn't until they actually opened fire on us that you got the idea that they had more than harassment in mind. Like I said, we were traveling in radio silence until the day before the capture. And at that point, a couple of North Korean fishing vessels happened to find us. Now, it's not like you're hiding. You can't hide out there on the ocean, but they didn't find us before that. And so those two fishing vessels spent the entire day out there photographing us, pulling away, coming back, circling us, pulling away, taking more photographs, and they spent the whole day out there with us. So we had officially been detected, and at that point we could break radio silence. So again, back in the Stone Age, up there in this particular part of the Sea of Japan, communications and atmospheric conditions were terrible. It took almost 24 hours for us to get up communications with our home base in Japan, Kamasaya. And when we finally got up, it was the day of our capture. And then the North Korean ships started coming out. First it was just a couple, but then eventually they had 6 ships and several planes overhead. it's interesting. I didn't think much of it. I was up on the bridge most of the time, up in the bridge, down Sod Hut, back up, and I always knew what was going on, but most of the rest of the crew were down inside the ship. Once general quarters had been, or modified general quarters had been declared, most of the men were just down somewhere inside of the ship. So they didn't know what was going on. And so one of them hired this artist, Richard Dorosset, to paint what actually went on. And it's the most accurate rendering of what went on. We did a lot of research on it. All the ships are the correct ships that were there, the correct numbers, correct colors, correct armament. The only thing they couldn't get was the actual numbers for the MiGs that were out there. But they used MiGs from the particular squadron that did come out. And of course, as they were coming out, they came out at general quarters, fully manned and with everything aimed at us. And it's kind of chilling to look down the wrong end of that much firepower. At that point, we broke out the radar to make sure we were in international waters, and that's why we were 16 miles from Yodo, one of the small island in the Wonsan area. So we were well into international waters, and we were anchored at the time. We had a cover as an oceanographic research vessel. Besides the 2 Marines on the ship, we had 2 civilian oceanographers, and they were out doing their work. And so Commander Bucher had them pull their stuff in and eventually decided we'd move. The North Koreans hoisted signal flags telling us to halt or they'd open fire. It's really kind of silly. We were anchored at the time, but you can't just jump, hit the start button and turn over the engines and get out of there. So it takes a while to get the engines up and running and moving. And he hoisted signal flags. Thanks for the attention. We're leaving the area. And when we started to leave, they started shooting at us. So at that point, it becomes more than harassment. Like I said, we were in communications with our home base in Kamasaya at the time. And to my way of thinking, the biggest point, that was the time to come and give us some little bit of aid. The last communications we had before we destroyed that equipment was that help was on the way. And but it wasn't. When you're working with this stuff, I had mentioned the size of the sod hut. Because the ship never held still, in order to do your work, you'd put your feet on one side, lean your chair back against the other wall, and try to do your work while the ship was jumping all around you. And so when you're working with that stuff, one of your biggest desires is to take a hammer to it and destroy it. But to destroy this stuff, although the equipment existed that would destroy it and the documents we had on board, we were not allowed to have it on the ship. Again, these are all things, there's been millions of changes since this incident, and that's one of them. It's on the ships now. But to destroy the equipment, all we had were sledgehammers and fire axes. The other Marine's a smaller, wiry guy, and he decided he'd take his anger out on the machine he'd been working with. So he grabbed a sledgehammer to go after it and swung, and it just bounced off the front of the oscilloscope that was on the machine. So I figured I wasn't going to get into the sledgehammer swinging contest. So I went for destroying documents. And they have now, and they had then, stuff for destroying the documents. You just have to start it and it won't stop. Turns it all into mush. But all we had on board to destroy these documents were trash cans and matches. So I decided we'd start burning documents. So I got several trash cans out in the hallway. And you can't throw a book in the fire. All it does is singe the cover and everything's good inside. So we've got thousands and thousands of documents, and you have to tear out the page, and you can't just throw it in the fire. You have to kind of hold it in the flames until it catches, and then you can let it go and go after something else. So we had these tremendous fires going on inside the ship. At the time, it didn't occur to me, but we were burning up all our oxygen. So we all started passing out in the hallways. And at that point, the fantail of the ship, for those of you not Navy-oriented, that's the back porch back there. It's an open area, and the hatch going out there, where all the smoke is showing in this picture, the hatch opened out, so we could use the hatch as protection from the Korean fire while we put our fires and things out there on the back porch. So that's what we were doing. And we got away with it for quite a while, and then the Koreans started shooting their bigger things at us, and came right through the side of the ship and just kind of blew us up. The guy that died, Dwayne Hodges, he was an engineman. He had no reason to be there, but we needed help burning this stuff. So they asked him and Steve Woke, both of who got wounded, to come up and give us a hand. So we were all out there trying to burn this stuff as feverishly as we could. And I had just finished burning what I had in my hands and turned around to grab some more when the shells started coming through the side of the ship and just blew us all up. People wonder what it's like to get shot. It really happens fast. And it just blew me off my feet, and I bounced off the wall and ended up on the floor. And then it doesn't really register what's going on. I could feel burning from the powder burning and things. And I wanted to get more steel between me and the next shot, so I started going down the hall into the chow hall, and more shots were hitting, and eventually I dove over some people, rolled out into the chow hall, and they said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah," but why I said it. Goodness. Well, I was saying that, I was saying to myself, who the hell are you trying to kid? Something's wrong. Goodness. Doesn't always get me. Okay. So then, I reach down, come back with a handful of blood, and then it's just like in the movies. They lay you down and tear your dungarees off and bandage you up as best they can. There wasn't anything they could do for Dwayne. He was in really bad shape. He died before we got on shore. Steve Woke was wounded a little worse than I was, and so we were both there and eventually made it onto shore. At that point, the Koreans came on board the ship. They tied us up and blindfolded us and had us in a couple areas of the ship. And it's cold. It's really cold out there, midwinter in North Korea. And so we sat out there till we got inshore in Wonsan. And from the beginning of the whole thing till we hit shore in Wonsan, it was probably 6 or 8 hours. And we were sitting out there, and Bob Hammond was next to me, and we were thinking which guards we were going to jump. We were blindfolded and tied up at the time, but we were watching the guards and figure who we were going to jump and what we were going to do as soon as the help that we knew was coming got there. It just never got there. So eventually that night we hit shore in North Korea. They started dragging us off the ship. Just because of my location on the deck, I was one of the first off the ship, and blindfolded and tied up, and they got me to the edge and they said, "Jump." Right. So I jumped and went down between the ship and the dock. Since I was tied up, they had their hands on the rope and dragged me back up, and then they kind of marched us through a gauntlet of North Korean unfriendly civilians and put us in the back of a room. Oh yeah, getting off the ship, one of them kicked me in where I'd been wounded. It was the start of a gruesome year. Anyway, we ended up in this room. We just call it a beating room because they just kind of worked us over for a while. But what they were actually doing was waiting for a train. And I don't know if you've paid much attention to Korea. It might be shaped like California, and Wonsan would be like on the east coast and Pyongyang's on the west coast. So Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. So they put us on a train eventually for an all-night journey over to Pyongyang. And then it was in and around Pyongyang in 2 different detention camps that we spent a year as their guests. That one picture with the captain and everyone holding their hands up was staged off the train there in Pyongyang. And then we were put on buses and taken to the first place of detention, which we call the barn, which really does discredit to an American barn because this was really a hellhole. In what were probably one-man cells, they originally had 4 men. And they had the 3 of the most serious wounded in one cell and put a healthy guy in to give us a hand. For the first 40 days, we were in the barn, and then they moved us to another POW compound outside of Pyongyang, which was more like what you would expect a POW camp to be like, except instead of barbed wire fence, they had like a 40-foot mound of dirt that surrounded the compound, and so we spent our time there. Like I mentioned, there's a whole hell of a lot of stories here. I think I want to open it up and see what you might want me to talk about, because there's all kinds of, anyone want to break the ice with a question? Yes. Oh.
In the short video that we saw, there was a picture of 8 men sitting there, and they were flipping the bird at the North Koreans. Were you in that picture?
I was in that particular picture, but I didn't flip the bird in that particular one.
Do you know who came up with the idea?
Well, it was a gradual thing. Once we were captured, it became very evident that they were more after propaganda than military intelligence. They had kind of the biggest haul of spies in history, but they didn't know what to do with what they had. There's so many things involved with this. When we were captured, it was the first Tet Offensive. The North Koreans had just infiltrated South Korea and tried to assassinate President Park Chung-hee, and the first Tet Offensive was beginning. It appears that Kim Il-sung knew Ho Chi Minh, of course, and that so Kim Il-sung knew the Tet Offensive was coming and was trying to provoke another war in Korea. Boy, I've gotten off your question. But so that didn't start until we got to the new place after the first 40 days. The first 40 days was a real problem. The 3 of us wounded, we're in the room, and although there was a radiator in there, it didn't produce any heat. So we're freezing to death, and we were probably dying. So they searched other cells until they found one that had some heat in it and transferred us to that. And then the heat started us to rot. There's 40 days here with all this rotten flesh and no chance to take a bath or shower or clean up or anything. There was a bathroom. It had urinals on the wall but no pipes, so you'd use it and down the wall and down the floor into the drain. They flushed the toilets maybe once a day, so you'd go in there and be a pile of crap in the toilet. And it was a good place to pass a message because the Korean guards didn't like to go in there either. And so eventually they did start some medical treatment. I'm still way off your. I will get to it. So we were, the Hawaiian good luck sign thing didn't start until we changed compounds. But a lot of the worst stuff started in the barn. And eventually they decided I had this big hole in me, and it didn't occur to me that there was no exit hole, that there was still something in there. And eventually they came in and with their probes and pliers and everything, tried to find what was in there and pull it out, and that didn't work. So they manhandled an antique Russian X-ray machine up to our cell area and laid us out on the floor, me and Steve Woke, and x-rayed us to find where the shrapnel was. And then a week or so later, they pulled several tables out of our cells and had me bring my bed sheet. And with 6 guys holding my legs, I'm sitting there thinking, what the hell, this can't be for real. And I didn't know what to do with my hands. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the whole thing was filmed, and it is, Ollie North did a film of us, and there's been some others. Oh, that one that Bill Lowe did, that's being shown here somewhere, shows part of that operation. And I didn't know what to do with my hands, and so one of the guards just indicated to hang on to my pillow. So I did, and they cut this thing out. I broke into a smile when they pulled it out. I had no idea I had something that big in me. You know, it's all covered in blood and Levi's, and it was a mess. Then they sewed me up with 2 stitches using the kind of cord you wrap around the roast, you know. And the stitches left as much scar as the wound did eventually. Gave me my bloody bed sheet back and sent me back to the cell. And that was the extent of, well, wasn't the extent. They all kinds of infections and stuff. It went on for 5-6 months before I healed enough. Steve Woke was a little worse, and they took him to a hospital. They put him in a closet in the hospital, and he was there for about 40 days and then came back and joined us at the other location. So all this is going on, and then eventually, in my own head, I knew they wouldn't keep us here forever. It just wasn't viable as a POW compound if we're going to be there for a while. So eventually, they actually took us to Japanese bath and let us clean up. Immediately stuck us on a bus and took us to this second place, which was outside of Pyongyang. And that's where we spent the rest of the time. And since they had switched by then to mostly pure propaganda, they had their photographers out there all the time, and they would come in the cell and bring. Once we moved in a 4-man cell, they had 8 men, and there was no room, especially in the smaller ones. There was 4 beds, a table right in the center, and 4 chairs. There was no room to do anything at the barn. It just had a little more room once we switched. So we kept trying to come up with different things that would screw up their propaganda. And since they'd come in and take pictures, we started, adjusting your eyeglasses or pointing to things in the books that they brought in or saluting each other or something. And we got away with it for a long time. And the first, we were going through periodic interrogations and everything through the entire year. And the first guy that they asked about it told them it was a Hawaiian good luck sign. So we passed the word in the crew real fast that giving the finger was a Hawaiian good luck sign. And we actually got real blatant with it from time to time. If they had us all in some room for some propaganda thing, Commander Booker would up there salute the crew, and the crew would salute him back, and then they were out there filming this whole thing and distributing it all to the world as their humanitarian treatment of us. It just wasn't that way in reality. Someone asked me earlier today what we ate. Mostly we ate turnips. I don't eat turnips anymore. They were turnips sort of cut up like large French fries and then fried in about 30-weight motor oil, and they were served to us in like a aluminum dogfish bowl or a dog food bowl, and your few turnips would be sitting there in coagulated grease. It was really kind of icky. I lost 60 pounds while I was over there. We'd get occasionally a piece of rice or a piece of bread. If we had fried turnips for breakfast, turnip soup for lunch, and fried turnips for dinner. So we had a cup of water to split 4 ways. So when you have, God, I'm getting dry mouth now. So when you're trying to eat this stuff in the morning, you don't have enough saliva to get the bread or the rice down, but you don't want to not use it. So we would take it and save it to lunch when we had the turnip soup and there was more liquid. But you had to do something with the rice between breakfast and lunch. So we had to find some way to, it's not like Uncle Ben's converted rice, it was just a lumps of goo. But the best place to hide it, you roll it up in a little ball and stick it in your armpit. And then come lunch, you'd break it out and put it in the soup, and then you could get it down. They believed that beating a thing to death improves the flavor. So they had some pigs around, and we could hear them beating them to death out back. So periodically in the turnip soup, they would throw some pig pieces. This gets gross at some points, but assholes and eyeballs and lips and things that you wouldn't necessarily want to eat, or this hairy fat thing. And so, and occasionally they would do the same with some fish. We'd have a little bit of fish. It was awful stuff. Some of the Korean guards asked me if we really ate it. And we did. I don't know what it was. If they were going to give us a little fish, they'd usually have them hanging on clotheslines outside the compound, and then they'd give us some fish. But it was really raunchy stuff. We called it sewer trout. So that's mostly what we ate. There was at one point in October, well, they thought they were getting what they wanted at the negotiations. So they increased our food for a couple of weeks, from nothing into a little something, and it gave us an egg and an apple. And it looks like in North Korea, whatever Kim Il-sung says was what went on. And if today was apple harvest day, by God, those apples are coming off the tree. So it didn't matter whether it was ripe, raw, overdone, or wormy. They'd pull the apples off, and they gave us some wormy apples. Always trying to get back at the Koreans in some way. So we found the best apple we could, poked some holes in it, and marinated it in urine, and then set it out for one of the guards that was a real kleptomaniac. He'd steal anything that was out there. Thank you. All right. Yeah, get that turnip down. It took some doing sometimes. And at that particular point, they practiced a couple trips down toward the DMZ, and even took us on a couple tours in Pyongyang, and took us to this one circus event at one point. We're in the little area at the arena. The whole thing is filled with military men, and they've got this lion taming act down there. And the lion was as emaciated as we were, wouldn't get up. The lion tamer guy just kept going around kicking the lion. Eventually he got up and then just peed on the wall. So we're biting our tongues trying to keep from laughing at this thing, and of course all the guards are watching us like this. But then during that time they also brought in their CIA people and took us down individually to what we called the gypsy tea room, and gave you some more to eat and drink if you wanted to drink, and trying to find out what we were going to say if we got released. And you'd get away with just telling them we're going to say the truth of what went on. But then the negotiations fell through, and that was it. Now, that was a long answer for your question. Anyone have anything else they'd like to know about? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. At any point did they deduce that members of the crew were able to speak Korean, and were you guys able to use that to kind of get one over on the captors?
I knew they knew within 3 days. I don't know how they found out. They could have gotten it from someone else. They could have found something on the ship. My service record books were not on the ship. One of the biggest problems that most of the crew had, their service records, the complete history of their entire service life, were intact on the ship and very low classified. They weren't even touched. So they had the service record books for almost the whole crew, and it became how much this stuff are you going to take before you admit that, yes, it's got your picture and fingerprints and signature and everything in it. I was lucky in that respect. My service record books were not on the ship, and I spent a lot of time trying to keep them without the knowledge of what I had done and things in South Korea and stuff like that. And I really did get away with that. But I knew they knew within 3 days. I didn't own up to it for about 2 weeks. And then I had nothing else to do while I was there, so I figured I'd learn as much as I could about their language. And the other Marine decided he was going to forget everything he ever learned. So, yeah, they would spend some, they weren't supposed to talk to us because I think we were heavy influence on their pictures of Americans, and we didn't fit what they had been told. And individually, many of the guards would talk to me, and there's certain things that just sort of blow your mind. One of them wanted to know why we think about things. Said you didn't have to think about anything. The government told you what the truth was, and then that's what you had to do. I don't think they ate much better than we did. They probably had more food. And we saw several different types of their military men. The initial people were their hard-charging soldiers. We also, when they had press conferences or something, their dress soldiers would be there. And every now and then, ordinary military men would come in. The ones that were the most brutal to us, we nicknamed them different things. The Bear and Cheeks were two of them. They kept them around for the entire time we were there. But they couldn't have been pure Korean. I mean, the Bear must have been this tall, and really a tough guy. He could knock me out with one fist. They broke my nose twice, of course shot me when we were captured. They really didn't like me a bunch, and they hated Marines, and were always trying to find out who's better, you or them. They spent so much time kicking me, obviously trying to kick me in the nuts. So I got very adept at moving and taking it in my legs and my stomach and things like that. And as a result, I've had 11 operations putting me back together since this thing. 3 hernia operations. I think I've got 2 nets in me now, but they really screwed up my muscles.
Mr. Chicca, you're surrounded over here. I'm right here, to your left, over here.
Oh, okay.
You're surrounded in this gallery by Medal of Honor recipients and their portraits, and each one of them has a quote that they've passed on to future generations. And so with your life experience, what quote do you live your life by, and what would you want to pass on to the youth and the generations in the U.S.?
Well, that's a tough one. There's probably a few things. Most American youth think the United States the rest of the world is just like this, just all the signs are in some weird language. But it's not that way. The whole method of life, the way they live, how they're governed is entirely different. We have something really fine here, even finer since the last couple of weeks. It's one thing I like to talk about. There were, when I joined the Marine Corps, I only weighed 110 pounds. I was a real skinny 18-year-old at the time. And after 3 months on Parris Island, I weighed 165 pounds of solid muscle. It was really tough on Parris Island. And the first class they take you to is how to escape from the island. because it's surrounded by swamps, and every poisonous snake in the country is there at Parris Island. So the first class they give you is how to escape if you want to dumb enough to try it. And but they really taught me a lot. And then there were times on Parris Island that I had it as bad or worse than in Korea. However, it got me ready for what I went through, and I cannot begrudge that at all. I'm very happy to have gone through that knowing what I knew. Bob Hammond, the other Marine, and I, while we were lost at Camp Pendleton, we studied survival, escape, and evasion and North Korean POW tactics, and met with a couple of North Korean POWs. The general that, was a colonel when we got there, that was overall in charge of us as POWs, turned out to be a Major Park from the Korean War, who ran a notorious POW camp, Pox Palace, in Korea, and had made his acumen on torturing and killing Americans, and he was in charge of us. So we had to be very careful with what we did. Surprising we got away with as much as we did. They also had us writing different things, and Commander Bucher got the best of it on one of them. When you're writing a letter, you can, or something, you can talk to dead relatives or things like that to get the thing out that this is kind of coerced. But he invented a friend, lot of crock-of-shit. And so he'd write this letter to a lot of crock-of-shit, and the North Koreans, when they would translate that into Korean, of course, it was just someone's name. But just like giving the finger, it got the message across back here. And so I'm jumping all over the board with this. One thing, not many people get a chance to be tested like that and find out you're okay. I'm really happy that I went through it. I sure as hell don't want to do it again. And from my personal life, what I see prior to it, I had a variety of dreams and things that I wanted to do, but never kind of took that first step to do them. And after I got out of Korea, I realized I could do whatever I wanted to, and that's what I've done since. And I've always been self-employed, and it's a hell of a life. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Yes?
There's talk oftentimes about trying to get the ship back and, going through negotiations with the North Koreans or, that type of a thing. There's also people who once in a while say, well, let's just drop a bomb on it so they don't have a propaganda tool anymore.
What
would be your thought on that?
Well, and I've been coming to Pueblo. I don't even remember when we had our first reunion here. We were in some 4th of July parades back when we were children. And there was a movement here in Pueblo. They wanted the ship back, and they actually had a lake and a place where they wanted to put it. And we would try to think of some how we would get the ship back and then dismantle it and get it shipped over here to Pueblo. And some of our presidents have done such stupid stuff. Bill Clinton, we were captured in Wonsan, and Pyongyang's over on the other side of the country. Bill Clinton let them take the ship to sea, sail it around South Korea, and take it up the river into Pyongyang. And that was the time to take it back, sink it, do something. And we were really pissed when we found out about it. They didn't tell us until it was already over with. They don't take good care of the ship. You saw only one side of the ship, and that they keep pretty. The other side is pretty rotten. They don't take care of the side you can't see. So it's probably, I believe it's set in concrete at the moment. It sank at one point, and they raised it and moved it up by a museum there in Pyongyang. And as much as I'd like it back, I don't think we're ever going to get it back. It's hard to believe the oldest ship in the United States is the Constitution back in Baltimore. The second oldest ship in the United States is the Pueblo now. And it's the only ship still captured by a hostile country. So as much as I'd like it back, I don't think we're ever going to get it back. I would like them to blow it up. I don't think they're going to do that either. But yeah, maybe someone will at some point. Back when it was still at sea, I can't believe for all those years that it was sitting in Wonsan. They could have made a SEAL operation, gone in, sunk it, taken it back, blow it up, but they never did any of that. So, yes.
So when you guys all came back to the States, how were you received? Were you treated as heroes, or how was the reception?
That's a tough one, too. We had no idea what to expect when we got back. We were incommunicado 100%. And once we got into South Korea, you saw us walking across the bridge in the movie there. And we'd been sitting there for like 6 hours. So the first thing we needed to do was go to the bathroom. And so we walked across the bridge, and they took us to, there's a picture back there of us in in the bathroom trying to, and gave us some noodle soup and donuts. That was good food. And we began to get the idea that we weren't in as much trouble as we thought we were, because the code of conduct had just gone into effect when we were captured, and here we were with all this stuff. They had the biggest haul of stuff and equipment and spies that they ever had, and what do you do with that? We weren't supposed to do or say anything other than name, rank, and serial number. So we tried to find out exactly what they knew in interrogations and things. If you held out long enough, they would tell you what they expected you to confess to, so you could confess to that and then keep other stuff secret. And so that's the tactic that we took, and then into the propaganda, trying to do what we could to destroy the propaganda. So we got into South Korea. They took us to a hospital there for a couple of days, and then brought us back into the United States via Midway and on. It was a nice trip. Anything getting out's like when the Vietnam POWs left. You're just elated when you get on that plane and get the hell out of there. And then we landed at Miramar. Ronald Reagan was there to meet us when we got in. And the United States, the people, had collected all this money and flew all our families out to San Diego, took over the El Cortez Hotel. And they put us on buses at Miramar, took us down to the El Cortez Hotel, and all the traffic had stopped. Goodness. Goodness. Everyone's out there waving, and they had signs up and all this stuff, and got us down to the hospital. And by that point, we were beginning to understand that maybe we weren't in as much trouble. The Navy was not happy with us, and we spent several weeks being debriefed here and in medical care at the hospital, and we're a real hot topic. It reached a point where the military gave away all the money that had been collected, sent the families home, and put us out on Coronado. So we were not, and then gave the money away. And we had to, it's silly, they gave it to USO to use for phone home, and we had to pay to call our families now. And then one radio station was really upset with that, and they collected some money. Again, this is back in the in the Stone Age, and they collected another $1,500 with the specification that it went to just the crew. So this was stuff I did at that time. And I was trying to figure what to do with 83 men and $1,500. And I ended up doing a ring for the crew and had Jostens make it. And that, so he's a yearbook guy with Jostens. I worked with Jostens for 27 years until I had a problem with them. But I did school rings, graduation announcements, caps and gowns, all that stuff for high schools and colleges. And that came about after doing this ring for the crew. 76 of the crew got the ring, and the other people got $73 or whatever it was. And then they had the court of inquiry where they were going to try to blame Commander Bucher for this whole thing. And so even that was they wanted me to speak to the court of inquiry in a closed session. So here I am, Staff Sergeant in the Marine Corps, sitting in front of all these admirals, and they just said, "What did you do to thwart the Koreans?" I mean, give me a little break here. If you'd have told me yesterday, I could think about it, but I just in there in this thing, and they popped me with the question. I had no idea what to say. I mumbled my way through, but I mean, it was that kind of a thing. And then eventually they indicated for that they would court-martial Commander Bucher. He actually wanted a court-martial to prove his innocence. And then the Secretary of the Navy, Chaffee, just put the whole thing on in limbo and said, everyone's gone through enough, it stops here. And that was it. And then we went back to our lives. Some people stayed in the military. About half the crew's enlistments expired while we were over there, and they were automatically extended for the duration. I still had some time to do. I actually thought I could have a career in intelligence. And so they sent me back to Fort Meade after the court of inquiry. Once I got back there, they wouldn't let me in the building. It was really kind of a gruesome thing. And eventually someone attacked my car with a hammer. And so I decided I'm leaving town. Called a friend in Oceanside that I'd met when I was at Camp Pendleton and said, "Find me a house, I'm moving west." So he went out, he took pictures of 3 homes, sent them to me. I picked one and moved west. Can't believe it now, you know, 1 sheet of paper and sight unseen, and now you got a ream of paper like this to buy a house.
It sounds like we should give Mr. Bob Chicca a proper welcome home.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks, man.